We were loud and we were strange.
Watch out where the huskies go, don't you eat that yellow snow.
Each show was like a composition.
What the hell is this? It's Zappa.
At every point, he was trying to do the best thing that he could to have no regrets.
Don't waste your time.
All right. I guess we'll jump in. So, first of all, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations on an awesome movie. I guess just to get a little bit of background, Ahmet, we know your connection, obviously. But Alex, was this like a dream come true for you? Were you a lifelong diehard Zappa fan?
Yes, it was in many ways. But it was also, honestly, from a doc filmmaking standpoint, it's one of the great untold American stories. So it was a dream come true from the artistic standpoint of being a Zappa fan since I was a kid. But it was a dream come true to be able to tell the story, because it's just an extraordinary and unique story, life story. And if you're going to spend 6 years of your life on something, I don't think being a fan of the albums is enough, frankly.
No. So, what made your pitch the right one? What made Gail say yes and give you the keys to the vault, which is sort of like the El Dorado for Zappa fans?
Well, it was, and I'll let Ahmet speak to this. I mean, it was kind of, I talked to Ahmet about it first, and I told him kind of what my thoughts were on what wasn't out in the world about Zappa. I mean, obviously they knew this because they're the family, but just from kind of an outsider's perspective, what I hadn't seen, what I felt was kind of missing from the public kind of language about Zappa. And we put a little, not a sizzle, I hate that word so much. We put like a little mini, video together that kind of conveyed the tone that we were going for, if we were going to make this film. And we got a really great response from those folks. And I think Gail liked that too. And that got us to sit down with her. But I didn't really know. I think that there
was more to it, and honestly, I haven't seen Alex in so long, but I'm just like smiling because I love this man. I feel really close with Alex, and I love the movie so much. And I want to say that, the journey and the relationship that was fostered between my mother and Alex was it was incredible. And she watched, his films before they sat down to kind of get ready for the conversation. And then when she saw the sizzle, she really liked it. But more specifically, Alex is a unbelievable filmmaker, but a human being with integrity, artistic integrity, very clear-minded, and they really hit it off. And I watched, this fast friendship form, and Gail's had a million meetings, in her lifetime, and other directors and people have approached her to do a doc. And I will say that the El Dorado, if you will, David, really comes down to his honest approach and his philosophy, how he would take care of things, and that comfort level that Gail had, was like, all right, if you're going to do this, well, then you're going to need to go into the vault. And I think that was like, I think for Alex, it's like a Tex Avery cartoon. His eyeballs, it's like up to hit the floor,
and not just from joy either. I might add, it's also like holy shit, right? Because it redirected the course of all of our lives, because there was so much material, and there is so much material in the vault. So, I was fully prepared to tell the story without the vault material. I didn't even know. It's not like it was apocryphal, because we'd seen Zappa himself down in the vault. I knew there was a vault, but I didn't realize the extent of it.
Yeah, it looks like when you see from random people that might have a glimpse, it kind of looks like a hallway, and it's not until I think in the doc you're like, it goes on and
Yeah.
on.
There are multiple hallways. Yeah. There is more than one hallway. And then there are rooms.
But
Yeah. Top to, floor to ceiling. So yeah, I mean, I was really appreciative of Gail, and it was one of those people that you sit down with, and her reputation preceded her. And you don't make friends with everybody when you're making a doc. You just don't. I mean, you hopefully have a cordial relationship. I was already friends with Ahmet, and had a great respect for him. But Gail was just one of those people you sit down with, you're like, oh, okay, I get you. And it's just the kind of person who I really like. They're they can be prickly, but they're super smart, and they have very, expansive view of art and culture. So we did hit it off right away, and we started just talking all the time. And I just started bringing the camera up to the house and filming her before we even had financing for the documentary. I mean, actually a couple of years before even. So it was a lovely process.
Alex, such a mensch in that, there was the passion to want the desire to do a doc, and without, financing, he really went, into his own pocketbook and started this journey. And it's a long journey to get to where we are now, happily, and I love the film. And I know that if Gail was still with us, she'd be so proud. And she had every intention of beating her cancer. But I really do feel like Frank and Gail would be proud of the art that Alex has made. I am. It's, boy, is it a gut punch emotionally. It's tough to watch at some moments because, hearing your dad talk about boning other chicks, never good. Rock and roll, man.
So were you surprised by the strength of the response to the Kickstarter campaign, and how important was that to keeping the ball rolling?
It was vital. It's an extremely expensive task to preserve that much media, and it's very specific as well. So it's not just money; it's expertise. I don't mean mine. I mean going and finding really the best preservation people for all of these different formats. And Zappa was such an ardent archivist of his own work. And other work. I mean, it was really like a constellation of stuff down there, but going all the way back to even before his birth. So you had every conceivable form of media, 8mm, Super 8, 16, 35, every formats of video that don't exist anymore. In fact, many formats of video don't exist anymore. So each one of those formats had a different expert that had to do the preservation work, that had often built their own machinery. So we had to find them, vet them, and then
honestly, they all live in their mother's basement.
Pretty much,
and we're so grateful.
Yeah, or like garages that they built, or like weird storage warehouses, and totally. They're all out in the weird, far-flung parts of the valley. So, but geniuses, and like a lot of them were sort of like mechanical geniuses or preservation geniuses. So it was a 2-year process just to do that work, and it was very, very, very expensive. So the Kickstarter itself took us about a year, and an enormous amount of work went into finding out whether there were enough Zappa fans everywhere that would be interested in this particular project, right? Because somebody like, hey, I just dig the music, man, right? And we didn't know. I mean, it was a research. The first 3 or 4 months was just research. It was like, who are the Zappa fans? Where are the Zappa fans? And what interests them? Once we felt there were enough of them that would be interested in this, we launched the Kickstarter itself. And I think we were half funded within the first 3 days. Within the first 3 days, we blew past every other doc-related crowdfunding project in history. But that was only halfway to our goal. And then we just kept going, and then we kept going. And the fans knew that it was just for preservation. It didn't, obviously we were using that media, some of it, not all of it, for the documentary itself. But none of that money was going to funding the doc. Zero. So we literally had a whole budget for the doc that we had to go and get separately after that. So we're really, really grateful to the backers, because they really put their money where their mouth was, and we would have lost a lot of this stuff without them.
It's true. I had no experience with Kickstarter campaigns, and I was like, oh man, I don't know. And the team, I mean, Alex and a gentleman by the name of Ivan Asquith, and just the way that they were knowledgeable about doing something like this, I had no idea what the outcome would be, and the gratitude that I have, because certainly at that time, my mother had just passed, and I didn't know to the extent that the content in the vault was, just disintegrating, and the problems that we were facing. So, I mean, I'm just blown away, and I think it's one of these really rare moments where, again, the fans of Frank, I'm eternally indebted to them for their passion and just loving Frank, and I love the way that the movie turned out, because so much of the archival footage is this movie. And really, it's just an unbelievable job that Alex and team have done on the film. And thank you, Alex. Thank you.
There's a lot of other people to thank, but yeah.
How did you go about deciding what you were going to use? I imagine you must have had an abundance of riches once this material had started going through the archival process. Mm-hmm. Was one of the biggest challenges simply sort of picking what to leave out?
I think that once I had an idea for the type of story that I wanted to tell. And then once Mike Nichols came on board, the editor, an editor on a doc is a hugely important artistic mind unto itself, right? It's very much a collaboration. It always is, but especially on documentaries, and especially
you pick
on archival
just based on their good looks, though, right?
I do, yes, yeah. I've never looked at his work, so I don't even know. It was all based on the visual. We were really interested in getting at who Zappa, not who he was in a kind of like puzzle that's going to be revealed, so much as we wanted to tell a story about his interior life. Like, what was it like to be an artist at that period of history, committing yourself to living a life of art, and the challenges, the obstacles, and all of that. The politics, his engagement with politics, his sexual politics, everything. So that was a very specific narrative. And we actually, I have to say, yes, we were challenged sometimes by certain darlings that we had to kill. But for the most part, we were pretty brutal and mercenary about not even thinking about using archival if it didn't tell that story. So we didn't even think about Zappa on the Steve Allen show playing the bicycle with a violin, which is a very famous piece of Zappa archival. It is already all over YouTube, but sure, we did have the masters of that, right? It never crossed our mind because it was just like, oh, that's fun, but it's got nothing to do with his interior life. So that immediately cleared the deck. I will say that if we found a piece of archival that was just extraordinary, we would find a way to use it most of the time. But the good thing is Zappa, being Zappa, was also largely interested in stuff that was more interesting and not just like rock star ephemera that, that would be more what you would expect. And the type of work that he collected himself and gave the most care to was often the most interesting archival. But the other thing we found down there, which was enormously helpful to us, was hours and hours and hours and hours of Frank himself talking, either on video, on film, on audio tape. And we basically Frankenstein monstered a running monologue. That was the very first thing that we did. That was much longer than what we put in the film, across time. And often it'd be Frank telling the same story. He would tell the story of like getting put in prison, for instance. He would tell that story in 1968. He would tell it in the 1970s. He would tell it in the 1980s. He would even tell it in the early 1990s. And we would make one sentence out of like 5 different periods of history. And that was really fun. So,
I cannot underscore that enough, that if you close your eyes and you're just listening to the talk track of Frank telling a story, just to make that have this the charisma and the balance and just getting the story right. I mean, that I don't know how the fuck you guys did that. I mean, did you have like the time stone from the Infinity Gauntlet to be able to pull that up?
It was extremely time consuming. We transcripted everything, but it was very time consuming. And to just answer your question, that was in a way the more challenging thing than figuring out what archival to use. Like, to what do you cover of Zappa revealing himself, and what's really going to convey that to audiences in an emotional way. That was really what took us time.
But I want to speak to Alex's genius here, and I mean this in all sincerity here.
I'm going to leave.
So now's a good time. By the way, this is what I'm going to say is not that great. So just go ahead. No, but when you see the archival footage, he's reacting in real time, and he has an idea in his head of the story that he wants to tell. And this is like how specific and to speak to Alex's talents here, to be able to wrangle, I mean, a billion hours of footage to go through all that stuff and to not get lost in it all, is really a Herculean undertaking. And, the work that he did with Mike and all of that, it is, when you see the finished product, you're like, oh, if you like it, you're like, this is great. That's a great movie. But it's insane what he's done. That's what I want to highlight. It is bananas. And we could have a doc that could be a year long. There's so much 365 days, of Zappa archival footage.
Yeah, I pitched that. I couldn't get it funded. I don't know why. Yeah.
I thought it was a great choice to have sort of Frank be like the narrator of his own story. And I love that format that you chose. So when did you decide that was going to be the right approach rather than sort of series of talking heads?
Well, I never wanted a series of talking heads. It just would have been unfair to Zappa. I never wanted lots of people from across his life talking about him. I was really, really uninterested in that. Everyone has a theory about Zappa. I really felt that, I told this to Gail from the beginning, that Zappa had such a specific perspective on his own life that even before I knew that we had that much actual audio of him, that was going to be our challenge, was like actually conveying his own POV as best as possible. I don't make music docs usually, and I like some, but I don't love the music doc that's just like, here's every single great rocker and other celebrity from across time telling you why they did or didn't like some poor bastard that's dead and can't speak for themselves anymore, or they're alive and they're like, oh God, this is super embarrassing. So I knew I didn't want to make that movie. But we were really lucky in what we found, and also not only that, but one of the things that helped me from the beginning was that I always knew that Zappa was going to be a different person in private than he was in interviews. The Zappa that presented himself in interviews was very similar to the lyrical Zappa, right? The Zappa that wrote Bobby Brown, or the Zappa that wrote Dynamo Hum, which I love, and I love his sense of humor. I love his wit, but it was very guarded, very controlled, very specific, right? I wanted the Zappa that was more vulnerable, more raw, more honest, and intimate. And I knew that Zappa was there. I'd read certain interviews with him, usually in print, that were very sober, very blunt, very self-deprecating, and I wanted to get at that guy. And thankfully, a lot of the audio that we're using is just him in the basement shooting the shit. Like, a lot of it's not interview footage. It's just him yakking like to a buddy, and we just cut the buddy out, right? And so we found that over time, and we were lucky that we found enough of it. If I hadn't found enough of it, we would have just, told it through archival and such. But we basically made the movie in reverse. Usually you go and you find all the talking heads, and then you kind of build the archival around that narrative. In this case, we built almost the whole movie, and we just had a couple of holes where we needed filled. And we went out and got people specifically to answer sometimes just one question. Like, just tell me this or tell me that. And then they would talk more and you'd get more from them, like Bunk or Pam or Steve or whoever. Ray.
I think you had the instinct. My memory of this was even when we first spoke and before we even sat down with Gail, I think this was also part of the thing that was, I think, appealing, was that you had that instinct from the beginning to have Frank narrate and tell his own story. And I mean, I remember you talking about, like, yeah, I don't want this to be, talking heads of all these other people. And I have to say that the way that left Gail and certainly myself, our level of confidence was like, okay, Alex, we just want you to tell. We are going to, you are the director with Final Cut. We want you to tell an honest story. You tell the story the way that you want to tell it. And, we are going to be hands off, right? And have access. And think about that for a second. From our perspective, that is a big leap of faith. So I really want to say that, Alex is as much as we can be jokey and palsy because we've been through it all together. He's just really on his game and super specific and very clear-minded. And I think right from the beginning, had this, again, instinct to tell the story the way that he wanted to tell it. And he did. What was delivered far exceeds I think the feeling that we all had in that moment in time. I mean, talk about an awesome guy. That's Alex.
I think it's very striking in the film. You sort of experience this contrast between some of the television interviews that Frank gave, particularly in the 80s, where you see how guarded he is in his public appearances and how much he's maintaining a wall of privacy around himself. But then we get this voice coming in, and it suddenly seems like we're inside his head. And I think that's a real feather in your cap, Alex, to bringing the audience into his mindset.
Yeah, and to Mike, obviously, and we were lucky in that the Kickstarter was so formidable and exhaustive that we ended up with the amount of time we spent just on the preservation work is usually the amount of time you have to make a movie, full stop. So we really had a couple of years to just wait around the material, which gave us a very good jump start on making the movie itself. And it gave us, because it wasn't, I mean, yes, Thomas' point, my instinct was to do that, but A, I didn't know if I could. I didn't know if the material would be there. And B, it really required the amount of time just swimming to really understand what Zappa was getting at. He was a complicated guy. He had a very specific worldview. And I didn't want to tell the wrong story. Like, I wasn't so cocky that I thought I had some kind of the magic formula to who Zappa was, right? It is a big responsibility. And so it gave us time to read every book, listen to every piece of audio, talk between us, usually on our team, and figure out kind of who he was and what he was getting at. But I will say that I had a pretty good idea, largely because Zappa's really, really articulate, which is why he was able to go to Congress and make this incredible speech and, basically save artists from their own from having their work censored back in the PMRC. He's extremely articulate. And thankfully, he's an honest enough person, and I'm speaking about someone, who's not here anymore, obviously, that even his running dialogue with his friends or with himself was also very articulate. He was not, for all of his guardedness and his reputation for being this guy who didn't let you in, he really would let you in. And that was another thing that I knew was kind of a myth that I wanted to break, was that even though he was a hard ass to his band, because he certainly was, I didn't interview anyone who wasn't in tears within 5 seconds thinking about how moving it was working for him. And even if they bitched and moaned and complained like we all do about people that we worked for, they were very moved by him because he really was a vulnerable guy in his own way. And I wanted to get at that too.
Yeah, I think that's part of the things that are interesting to me is people's memories and their experiences. The in the doc, people telling their stories around Frank. And even for me, I mean, I grew up just knowing that there's people that that Frank, either you were in or you were out, that people that would be around, and he had, they could do whatever they wanted because that trust had been established. And then there were just people that just didn't get it, and didn't make it into that space. And that was kind of awesome to see again, because I grew up with like those being values, and so the movie is a real emotional journey of for me, the gratitude that I not only have for the fans for preserving everything, like I've mentioned, but also to Alex and this journey, because I got to see things that, when you look at a piece of tape, it has like writing on it. That's what you might assume is on there. That could totally be inaccurate, and you discover that there's all of this other stuff there. So, we now have way more information about what's actually in the vault, and the things I've seen have reduced me to tears. It is. I mean, again, the gratitude and the experience. But again, Frank, not like me, where I'm saying and like, and I have this thing where I can't express myself super articulate in an articulate way. Frank did not suffer from that at all. He took the time, answered every question specifically, and was mercenary. It was awesome.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of what the future holds for the vault? I mean, you've got all this material there.
We have plans. Alex and I have been talking about that in many ways. I think there's more to do, right, Alex?
There's a lot more there. There are many other stories there, and there's also other perspectives into the times through what's there. That's really valuable. And obviously, there's a lot of music there. And there's a lot of stuff that, and this is, something that there's just to blow some smoke back up Ahmet's backside, that this is something that ZT has done very well. And Gail did very well as well while she was alive, is, the fans have been really well serviced since Zappa died. And, Joe Travers, the Vaultmeister, and other people on that team have done pretty amazing things. The soundtrack, we released a soundtrack, specifically for the Zappa backers. That's exclusive for them. But the full package soundtrack for this movie that Ahmet and Joe and the team at the ZT put together is insane. It's insane. There'll be more stuff like that, basically.
Once you kind of get into, you get the archival bug, that's what's fun. It's good to have Alex as a comrade in arms, because you do feel like Indiana Jones, right? You're searching through all this stuff to find the hidden treasures. And so much of what we do on a daily basis on the music side is just that. And, it was really, really a lot of fun. There were so many ups and downs in this movie. It's a miracle it got made. And
it is. I will actually stop and say that real briefly, is that for all of the good luck we had and the kismet and Gail saying yes and having the access to the vault and getting almost 10,000 backers, when I'm just going to say that when I first sat down and told Gail the story I wanted to tell, she was like, "That's great, but who fucking cares?" And she didn't mean she didn't care, right? She meant she really didn't feel confident that the world would care. And, so it's very moving for me that we've had the reaction to the film that we had. And I got to just say that, I didn't even know how much people would care. The very first time I realized there are interesting things when you make a doc. I know we're on limited time, but you work kind of in a funnel. Like, you believe in your story, maybe some of the people around you do. And it's not so much that you think what you're doing is great, but the subject that you're working on, you think is compelling enough to have devoted that kind of time to it. It's a gamble, right? Mm-hmm. I honestly didn't know if anyone was going to give a shit about this thing until we showed it to a room full of people at the record company that, and I don't want to put people on the spot, but there was a lot of people in the room.
Yeah.
And I walked in after that screening. It was the first time anyone had seen this thing outside of like us. And they were really, really moved. And they really took the ride. It's a hard ride. It's 2 hours. It's aggressive. It's very specific. It's about a very specific artist that not everyone likes very much, to be honest, people who love him, people who hate him, people in the middle, right? But I looked at the audience. I was like, oh yeah, this thing's going to work. It's actually working. Like people do I think Gail would have been really happy about that. I think people really do. They care. They really care.
100%. But you made them care, Alex. That's the point. And I think that that's why I'm so pleased, and I know Gail would be so happy. Is one of the things that was so near and dear to her heart was can we get people to understand what it was like, from my mother's perspective, and something that she hoped would come across is the life of a composer. And to make that be known in Frank's body of work and where he was coming from, and at that, our partners at Universal is a label that Alex is talking about. And they're wonderful, but even people that I work with and interface with on the music side, they all were like, "Wait, I now finally have a better understanding of Frank." And I mean, there were tons of people in tears. So I'm so proud of the film. I hope everyone enjoys it. It's really
great.
I know our time is running down very quickly. The very last line of the film: if anyone in the audience gave us any trouble, we tell them to fuck off. Why did you decide to sign off with that wonderful quote?
Because to me, it conveys who Zappa is. He cared about his art. He cared about his audience. He cared about the choices he'd made in his life. But honestly, he didn't really give a rat's ass if the rest of the world did not care. It was enough for him that he cared. And I think he had a lot of stock in his own devotion to making things that he thought would be valuable to himself and hopefully to the rest of the world. It didn't mean he didn't care about the audience, but he did not really care so much about how he was perceived. To him, it was all about the art. I think it's a lovely sentiment, actually, especially in this culture we live in, which is so about, metrics and data and tomato meters and all, all of these things that we have to deal with now. So that's why that's in there.